Hey guys, welcome back to another Default Cube CG Matter tutorial, and in this one I want to talk about how to make procedural snow because, who has done that on YouTube? Yeah, it's been done before, but we're going to take an interesting angle at this. Is this the best looking snow in the world? No, but what you're going to notice is I'm going to show you how to control the direction of it, kind of like where the snow is falling. Is it coming from above or from the side? Maybe there's wind or something. So you can make the snow look better on your own time, although it's a pretty good starting point. Some might even be fine with this, especially if it's further away. But controlling the directions, what we're really interested in, and also this kind of border effect that we have here that isn't just a clean border. So I guess let's just get right into it. And by the way, this works with any mesh, works with any scenario, completely procedural. So let's open up Blender, and this is the scene I have by default. It is just a sphere. It's lit by an HDRI, which you can locate the nodes by hitting period. It has an HDRI for lighting, and since we're going to be using displacement, it has a subdivision surface with adaptive enabled. Since we have experimental, you don't need to have adaptive, but whatever. So this is just the basic setup. If you don't know what's going on, I advise going to an easier tutorial because I assume you already know how to navigate Blender before you make snow. We're just going to focus on snow for this tutorial. Okay, so what are we going to do here? So by default, or at least what I've set up already, is just a BSDF going to our material output surface, meaning that our sphere just kind of looks like this BSDF. We can control the color, whatever. This is not really what we're concerned about. This is going to be the base material, and then we're going to make a section of it that's snow. So to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a diffuse BSDF. And the way you want to think about it is that this is going to be snow, and this is going to be everything else. So the gray and the snow. We mix these together, which you can do by adding in a mix node or use shortcuts, whatever you want. You could just add in a mix node. And if we change the factor, one will give us snow, one will give us the other stuff. So clearly we don't want to have just a number for our factor. And that's a pretty common theme with procedural materials. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a factor mask that divides where we want snow and where we don't. And here's the main trick of this tutorial. This is the main takeaway. Pay attention. What we're going to do is we're going to add in a geometry node, and we're interested in normal coordinates, which basically say which direction our sphere is facing. And by the way, there is a difference between shade flat. Let me disable this temporarily. There's a difference between shade flat and shade smooth. It literally affects the normal coordinates. It doesn't affect true normal, which looks the same either way because it's the true normal. But just normal coordinates are affected by smoothing. So make sure that if you want smoothing, you have smoothing. Let's enable that again. And since this tells us the direction, the normal coordinates, you might think that they're an important component in figuring out which direction we want the snow to come from, and you'd be right. Now, there's a lot of ways to do this, but I found the easiest way to pick a direction is to use a normal node, which looks like this. I don't think people use it that often. So we're going to have normal coordinates going into the normal node, and we're not interested in this, but we're interested in the dot product. And for those of you who do not know linear algebra, or yeah, it's linear algebra. A dot product is this mathematical operation that will basically just compare, in this case, our normal coordinates and this sphere thing that we decide, which is just going to be another vector. It compares them, and in some mathematical way, it determines the angle between them to some extent. You don't need to worry about what it means, but the dot product basically shows the relationship between two vectors, saying how close are they to pointing in the same direction. That's the essence of it. Meaning that if we now change one of these vectors, not the normal coordinates, but this one, you see we're actually kind of picking a region. And you might be thinking this is a bit weird, like right now the sphere is facing me, but it's up top. It's because this is already baked into bird's eye view. And what I mean by this is whatever you see here is what you're going to see from bird's eye view. So we tilt it forwards, and it tilts forwards here, left, right, pretty simple scenario. But what you can tell this actually does is it sections off areas of our mesh, meaning that we can just start off by taking this dot product, using it as our factor. And this is already a pretty strong start, right? So now we've determined where we want our snow. So I guess we can make it a bit stronger. That might be the next step. And if you hear a bit of laptop fan action, you're not going crazy. It's just that my mic is close to my laptop and I'm not doing noise removal, so whatever. We can multiply it. If we multiply it by 1, nothing happens. 2 makes it more intense, and you can go even more intense with like 100, which will give it a very crisp edge, but I like 2. So now the next thing to think about is how do we make this edge not so clean, right? We want to pick the direction but not have this cut off cross-section line so obvious. I'm going to use a trick I use all the time, which is adding a noise texture, which has kind of distortion at its very core. We're going to use it for distortion. We're going to combine these together with vector math, although some people like mix RGB, but those guys are losers, and they should stop using Blender. And you can see that this already gives us a bit of distortion, but it also moves the border, right? So here's before and after. The border moved down. So the correction term is you just add again negative 0.5, or you subtract. Now, I've gone over this explanation like 100 times, but the reason for this is what we're doing is we're just adding noise to our normal coordinates, but every point on our surface, when we look at our noise, is going to have some value between 0 and 1, which means that on average the value is 0.5, which means that on average everything drifts over by 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. So you just correct by subtracting. In other words, this adds a bit of average motion that we undo, is the idea. So that gives us a nice kind of weird distorted edge, which I like. We can make it crispier if we want by adding in detail. So now you can see we have a pretty harsh edge, and then 1 gives us a nice soft edge. I'm going to go with full 16 for now for full detail. Okay, so now we've got snow that we can control the direction of, and it's going to give us a nice distorted border. Okay. I say, before we do any more stuff with this, let's actually have it affect displacement. So you add in a displacement node, pretty basic stuff. And we're going to use this, basically our factor for where there is snow, to say where we want to displace it, which makes sense. We want to displace in the same area that we have snow. So take this, make it the height, and it's going to look a bit weird for various reasons. Looks great, actually. To fix this, what you want to do is take your mid-level to 0, and then take your scale way down. So if you have 0, there's no displacement. But you can crawl up to something like 0.1 to give it a bit of displacement, 0.2 for even more. It starts looking like a rock if you do too much. So let's go with 0.1 for now. So you're noticing that this gets us closer. It's definitely displacing the snow, but it's also displacing the gray area, which kind of makes it look like a boulder. And you might be thinking, oh, why is that the case? Well, it's because this isn't actually this little mask we did over here without displacement. It's not just like white here and black here. There's some like negative values and stuff like that going on. So in the black, it's not just 0 displacement, but sometimes it's negative displacement, meaning go in the opposite direction. So that's what's going on. That's what you're not seeing. So essentially what we need to do is kind of clamp it. But you can't just use, let me view this. You can't just enable clamp because it does fix the issue. Now it's rounded, but it also kind of rounds off the top anywhere that has a value above 1, which is no good. So we need a better solution to clamp only the bottom. To do this, what I like to do is do a greater than. Can you guess it? That's right, greater than 0, because we want to see where we want to eliminate negative values. So greater than 0 does that. So now we have the region that's bigger than 0. And then all we have to do, keep viewing the wrong node. All we have to do now that we've created this like greater than mask is I'm going to multiply this with the original result, which now gives us same kind of thing going on, but now our sphere is nice and round, and there's no like clamping on the top of this. That being said, it still looks awfully round, and that's because while there is variation on the border, there isn't that much variation anywhere else, right? So how do we fix that? One way to do this is maybe by, here's what I would recommend, I guess, take a noise texture. I'm just going to duplicate it. And this is, again, just something we use to add variation, and we're just going to multiply these. This is one way to do it. And now you can see there's variation in the height over here as well. So 1 will give us a nice kind of bumpy, by bumpy I mean smooth, hilly variation, whereas something like 100 should give us spiky. Yes, it gives us spiky. So you kind of pick what you want, and for this I recommend lower detail. But you can see there's kind of like nice chunks of snow, which we can make more intense, at least in displacement, by bringing this up. So now the snow's really piling up, but it kind of looks like rock again, so maybe take your detail down so it looks more gooey, more smooth. So let's go with like a 0.2. Doesn't look great, but whatever, you get the idea. So now we have a basic node setup. That's true, but I meant to say snow setup. that we can control the direction of. So let's see that in action. So that's pretty cool. All of this works with any direction. You can make the snow look better, in various ways, but honestly, this looks fine. And the nice thing about this is, I guess a sphere wouldn't be the way to demonstrate this. Let's use something like Suzanne. Apply the material, and then make sure to add in a subdivision surface with adaptive. I keep thinking 2 steps behind. I meant with smooth shading. And now you can see we have the same setup on Suzanne, where we can again control the direction of the snow. Notice that sometimes it looks a bit weird on the creases because the displacement's self-intersecting itself, and you either want to get a better mesh, or what you can do is make the scale a bit smaller to make that a little less noticeable. But you can see the setup is pretty much, literally exactly the same. But what I wanted to highlight is that since this relationship is determined by essentially normal coordinates, and this vector that we chose, which, we compute a dot product for, since these are the only things it depends on, we can always rotate the mesh, and hopefully in your eyes this is a good thing, but now the snow is kind of coming down on whatever's facing up. So now we have snow all over the face. If I rotate it a bit more, now we have snow gathering here. So it's kind of like no matter which way the object's oriented, the snow is coming from above or whichever direction you specify. And if you don't want that, you can make this vector here dependent on the orientation of the object. But I'd imagine in most cases, this is actually something people want. So there you go. I feel like that's the essence of it. Always remember shade smooth, and always remember to add in your geometry for a good displacement. But yeah, you can use the same kind of methods to do moss and stuff like that. That's originally what I was experimenting with, because there's also that, do you want moss on the left or the right side of the rock thing? But for those of you that always comment to show the full node setup, there you go. That's the network we made. Hopefully you understood how I did it. If you want to support this channel, now that this tutorial is pretty much over, Patreon is the best way to do that. I highly appreciate anybody who has the means to donate and wants to and actually finds themselves over on my Patreon page. I really appreciate it. You do get benefits beyond just, the good feeling of donating to me, CG Matter. But you do get stuff in return, depending on your tier. So if you're at a very high tier, you get some exclusive video courses. I'm trying to do 1 a month. Maybe I'll do more than 1 a month. So far, there's 1 video course out, that hand thing, that you can get on Patreon or on Gumroad. You can also get private access, behind the scenes, tutorial files where relevant, stuff like that. But either way, I like to plug at the end because I feel like, I've given away the free information, and now if you're still around, in some sense, you're a devoted watcher. So either way, Patreon is the best way to support me. I highly appreciate it. And if you want the video course I was just talking about with that hand, that flesh hole thing I've been advertising for a while, but you don't want to get it via Patreon, you can get that on Gumroad. Description is the way to find all these links. But hopefully you understood, you learned, you now know how to make snow. That's the tutorial, guys. Thank you for watching.